This presentation was recorded at the Best Practices for Pollinators Summit. For more information, contact pollinatorfriendly.org.
Well, welcome everyone. It's good to be here. I'm here to talk about my experiences with a place called Huffman Prairie, and I suppose its importance to pollinators and activities that have gone out there. And this site is a prairie remnant in southwestern Ohio. The black dot there is Dayton, which happens to be in Montgomery County, and the Huffman Prairie remnant is about 8 miles to the northeast in Greene County. Just give you a little bit of basic orientation there. Back in 1800, the prairie was a lot different. The whole landscape was, of course. It was about 3 square miles or a little more along the Mad River in Greene County, and a lot of it was wet prairie, and then a whole bunch of it was also sort of drier, moist prairie, surrounded by sort of wild thickets of hazelnuts and plums and things like that, as well as hardwood forests. So it was a very diverse region in 1800 and full of all sorts of diversity of life. And this prairie was just one of many in this Mad River Valley. So this shows the plant communities in 1800. And as you can see, all that area of pink and red going to the northeast of Dayton, those are all they call fire-dependent plant communities, such as prairies and barrens and savannas and things like that. There was a lot of indigenous fire helping to maintain these areas over time. And you can see that Huffman Prairie was one of many. But virtually all of it is gone. The moist prairies look like this at their peak. I think they were quite rich, several hundred species of native forbs and grasses and accompanying insect life and animal life. Pretty amazing places. But almost all of them were subsequently destroyed. They, of course, helped generate some of the world's best soil that people were anxious to put into cultivation. So the wet prairies ended up like this with ditches and a whole series of drain tiles in the surrounding fields to drain them. And most of the upland moist prairies were just simply plowed and planted. So with some exceptions, almost everything left was either along a railroad track or a pioneer cemetery, just tiny little pieces. In southwestern Ohio, though, in the Dayton region, we got a little bit luckier in the sense because of a couple of, one of the main reasons is a couple of famous Daytonians. The field that was Huffman Prairie, a lot of it was being used for cattle grazing back in 1904. This was before people had really gotten into tiling it, and of course it was before heavy equipment or herbicides. And a couple of brothers from Dayton decided that this would be a great place to experiment with their airplane after they got back from North Carolina. They wanted someplace closer to home, and the Wright brothers chose Huffman Prairie as the place to experiment with their plane. And here, as you know, they really invented the airplane. Here at Huffman Prairie, they learned how to turn. They learned how to manipulate the plane in 3 dimensions and kind of changed world history, really, right here on this field. And because of their activities, really, the whole field that's there became an Air Force base instead of a farm. And the Air Force subsequently managed the land differently. And of course, a lot of it was destroyed in the process of making an Air Force base, but a lot of it wasn't. And part of those areas were not completely destroyed, although this was kind of a secret because virtually every bit of it was mowed almost continuously as just part of the management of the base. And this was true until 1986, and it was rediscovered. So went out there in 1986, and they had got behind on their mowing. And this was part of, I was out there looking for prairie as part of a statewide prairie inventory project. And there it was, but even as we saw it, it was being mowed down. So an effort was underway, sort of a collaboration of the natural history community with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to protect this site. And it was successful. And they dedicated 109 acres to prairie restoration. And then they, in the state of Ohio, dedicated it as a state natural landmark in 1986. And this is kind of how it was back then. There was some of it was pretty high quality prairie remnant. Some of it was kind of a mixture. And then some of it really was just mostly non-native pasture vegetation. But it was very encouraging that the federal government was anxious to take this on, and they've been a great partner ever since in the restoration of this site. Almost right away, it attracted the attention of the Nature Conservancy that was getting into an agreement with the federal government to inventory and manage important natural areas on Air Force or military bases. And they decided to take on the restoration of Huffman Prairie, working in coordination with the base and the local park district. And first step was they hired this young man to come out and do actually they had several people working on an inventory of the site, looking at the vegetation, looking at the insect life, moths and butterflies, looking at nesting birds, the whole thing. They wanted to, before they started trying to change anything, figure out what was there, which is pretty good way to start. And they came up with some pretty outstanding information. Just for instance, in their vegetation study, they came up with 115 species of native plants, some prairie indicators, and non-native species. They figured out what the frequency of these were. Their butterfly numbers were pretty good, although they didn't have any prairie endemics. And then the moth survey was pretty amazing. They came up with 231 species, including 3 that were new to science. And a lot of these were kind of these micro moths. And part of it, that probably reflects that it was a great site, but also that not many people had looked at those moths. It had healthy populations of 7 declining grassland bird species, like bobolinks and dickcissels, things like that. There was a seed bank study to see, well, okay, in these areas that don't seem to be expressing much prairie vegetation, is there a seed bank that it could come back from? And the bottom line was no, they couldn't really find a seed bank that wasn't expressed in the vegetation. Another interesting inventory was what had been done long ago. The site was of interest to botanists in the 1830s and came out and collected specimens. And actually, one of them made a really beautiful herbarium. And 2 species were described to science from Huffman Prairie, including this one, the Riddle's goldenrod, that was discovered here in the 1830s. And other things like the royal catchfly. This is from the herbarium I was telling you about, which was a great resource to get some idea of maybe what all that grazing and mowing might have removed and draining. So we had, some pretty good information as to what was there. The Nature Conservancy decided to really implement controlled fire as a way to help restore it. And they came up with this plan to burn half of it every year, kind of rotating it around so that there was always one quarter that went 2 years without a burn. And it was pretty effective. I mean, at least on the areas that were healthy prairie, which are kind of the crosshatched areas there. It really did boost the native plant diversity and abundance, which was quite encouraging. However, the areas that weren't expressing a lot of prairie vegetation didn't seem to help a whole heck of a lot. And there's a picture of the first fire they did back in 1988, I believe. So an effort decided that we would try to restore the degraded sections of the prairie. And it wanted to be a bit purist about it. So we started collecting seeds from the immediate neighborhood, from the prairie itself and some of the other prairie remnants that were around. And especially using the herbarium records that we had to figure out what maybe was missing. And these were collected and grown up in a greenhouse, and the seedlings were separated and grown into larger containers. And the Nature Conservancy would then have these fairly large volunteer programs to plant them. And here you can see where this big patch here of non-native grasses was rototilled up, and they're out there planting all these forbs that have been grown from local seeds. He also had a lot of work sessions. Volunteers would come out from all over Ohio to help with land stewardship work. And most of that was like pulling non-native species, and most of it was handwork. Pulling non-natives or cutting them and or planting the plugs like you saw before. They didn't want to use pesticides, herbicides of any kind, and just kind of wanted to do this sort of gardening approach, I guess you'd say. And they were at it for 10 years doing that. And on a larger scale, on the very south end of the site, where there was nothing expressed significantly in prairie vegetation, decided to actually mold board plow a piece and then reseed that. So that was sort of a stretch for them, but they went ahead and did it. You can see that beautiful black prairie soil there. This is what it looked like about 5 years later, where it was plowed and reseeded with a good diversity of local seed. And it came up fairly spectacularly here in this portion that was basically started over. However, the rest of the site, where all that other stuff they tried, as far as handwork and putting in plugs or just pulling out invasive weeds, really didn't do much good. And the Nature Conservancy folks did another research in 1998. They came back and did a follow-up research to compare with their original research and didn't find much improvement except for this patch here. So they discontinued they gave up basically at Huffman Prairie. I think they decided they had other projects they could put their resources to that would show more results, and they left the project. In 2006, Wright Pat didn't want to lose what progress had been made, So they hired a consulting company to come out and do a study to evaluate where it stood. And it wasn't the greatest report. It came out with only 7% of the site was healthy prairie remnant. About 23% was intermediate, and 70% they classified as degraded. So at that point, the local park system, Five Rivers Metro Parks and Wright-Patterson, decided to take a more aggressive approach to the restoration to see if they could get this site to come back and give it more of a chance to at least be more than the 7%. And the biggest drawback to the restoration was this grass, which is smooth brome or Hungarian brome. And the farmers that were here before that were encouraging hay, as well as the airfield managers of Wright-Patterson, planted this stuff all over the place. And it's a real, you can't plant plugs or even drop seed into the smooth brome and have any hope for restoration of the site. And so really, we all concluded that really the only way that we're going to restore the prairie is to get rid of this stuff. And so we initiated a program of spraying, wherever we had big patches of this smooth brome. It had a weak spot in that it came up early in April before most of these prairie stuff had emerged at all, and was quite vulnerable to a fairly weak glyphosate solution. So we started doing this a quarter at a time out on Huffman Prairie, and it felt a little odd to do that and see some of the prairie just turn brown like this. But it turned out it was the thing that turned around the restoration of the site, and that all these areas that were seemingly nothing but smooth brome, once the brome was killed, came back very nicely into native vegetation. And a lot of it was big blue stem and Indian grass and some other dominant things like that, but a fairly good variety of native forbs too. So that was very encouraging. And as you hear a lot of bad things about glyphosate, but at least in this case, sort of a one-time exposure did a world of good and really started sort of unleashed the prairie to restore itself to some degree. In places where there wasn't a whole lot of diversity seeming to come back, we utilized, and we did see things start coming up out of the seed bank, which was really cool. And even though the study that was done showed there wasn't one, a lot of things did come out of the seed bank after the spring, including we had a huge population of this state endangered fern, the northern monkshood, that came up all over the place, and it had never been seen before. And quite a few other ones did as well. So that was amazing. Yeah, northern adders. That's it. So in the areas that didn't seem to have a whole lot, we decided to add locally collected seed of the things mostly that were from that old herbarium or other species in local natural areas, remnants, and use a seed drill to give them a boost. And that really worked too. This is just one of the patches we reseeded with the seed drill. That red plant you see there is a state endangered plant, the royal catchfly. And it was recorded from Huffman Prairie in the 1830s. And now if you go out there, I think there's more of that at Huffman Prairie than the rest of Ohio put together. It just loves it there and has spread very nicely. So in 2014, this is 10 years ago, we did a study was done to see, well, okay, how's this new approach doing? And it was pretty amazing how far it had come in a pretty short time, and that the frequency of non-natives had decreased, and the frequency of natives on the plots went way up. And that's very encouraging. And it's time to do it again. It's been 10 more years. I think we need to do another look at this and see how we're doing back in 2024. So there's been a lot of recent research to follow up on all this. And for instance, last year or 2022, the Fish and Wildlife Service did a bat study out there and found 5 species, including the federally endangered Indiana bat foraging at the prairie. They did a big bee study and found 52 species. And it's something else to see the bees out there in the summer. And 52 species. I wish I could tell you I knew them all. I don't. Herps, they found 4 species of snakes out there, including the state threatened smooth green snake, which are seen fairly often out there. A beautiful, beautiful snake if you've never seen one. Other follow-up butterfly studies have been done there. It's up to 34 species, up from 22 from the first time they were sampled. And native plants is probably the most impressive change, up to 253 species, including 42 that were reintroduced and 88 that came up out of the seed bank or were too small numbers to detect in the early studies. So we're up from 123 species in 1992. It's become quite popular for field trips and naturalists to come out there and look around. And there's a couple of trails you can walk around if you can find the site. And it is a local treasure. I think that people really love. And lately, probably the last 7 or 8 years, we've kind of shifted the restoration to a technique called overseeding. And I got this tip from a restorationist named Steve Packard, who was really up on the potential of overseeding. So you don't drill and you don't plow, but if you overseed and intermix, assuming you don't have a solid cover of brome or something like that, you can really increase the diversity over time. It takes longer than like plowing it up, but it does work. And so by interseeding it, every year, especially after a burn, we'll go over there, and any patches that seem a little weak, we'll use locally collected seed to just overseed it. And it's pretty non-intrusive and seems to help a lot. We have this really nice whirligig seeder here pulled by either a tractor or an ATV that makes it pretty easy. So this last year we did a study to see how it's doing. It wasn't a scientific study in the sense of it was just sort of a walkthrough, walking along these grid points, and came up with this summary of where it is now. So now most of it's in the very good to good category. Still a couple fair areas kind of weak, and one that still pretty needs a lot of work, but it's come a long way. And I think as time goes on, it'll hopefully all be dark green. But it's a neat place if you get the chance to go. It's managed by 3 agencies that work together: the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the 5 Rivers Metro Parks. And there you can see them out doing a prescribed fire. So this next part is going to be just sort of a sort of a slideshow of what you can see out there through the year at Huffman Prairie, and it's the length of one song. So it's a sort of more of in the entertainment category, I guess, but it doesn't take very long, and then we can move on. I hope this works.
I feel home like a tale. That's just love. I lose my life. Say me, go back again. It's so on the radio. I feel someone. We stay on. Now that someone. So I close my eyes. Say go back again. Go back again. I had a dream about a place. Shining sun on fields of gold. Could it be heaven? No, I close my eyes. Say go back again. Go back again. Go back again.
Well, I hope you could hear that, and I hope it worked. I can't really tell from this end. But if anybody wants to learn more about this site and how it relates to the Wright brothers or the restoration efforts that have been out there, there is a book about it called Discovery and Renewal on Huffman Prairie. And you can get that and learn more about it.